The mansion was silent, but Maria's heart raced as she stood before the billionaire heir. "Your blood is the antidote," he said, his voice laced with desperation. She was nothing but a poor maid, yet somehow she held the power to save him or destroy everything. What was the catch? What would she have to sacrifice to be the hero of this twisted tale? Maria Jenkins had spent her entire adult life in the shadows, moving quietly through the grand halls of the Hawthorne estate. A poor black maid, she was invisible to the world that surrounded her, her presence barely acknowledged by the wealthy family she served. Every morning, she would wake before the sun, tending to the mansion's endless needs, dusting the priceless antiques, scrubbing the marble floors, and preparing meals for the Hawthornes, whose lives were filled with luxury and ease. She had no family of her own, except for her baby boy David, who had been born under difficult circumstances. David's father, a fleeting lover with no intention of staying, had abandoned them before the child had even taken his first breath. Maria had raised him alone, determined to give him the life she never had, despite the odds stacked against her. But the world she lived in offered no mercy to women like her, poor, black, and invisible. Her dreams for David were modest, a better life, free from the oppression she faced every day. But those dreams seemed increasingly out of reach. The Hawthorne family had always treated her as little more than a servant. William Hawthorne Sr., the patriarch, was ailing, and his only son, William Jr., was a cold, calculating billionaire with a reputation for ruthless business dealings. Maria had never had a direct conversation with William Jr. until one fateful evening. That evening, William Jr. called her into his study, his face grim and filled with worry. His father's health had deteriorated rapidly, and the family's fortune was at stake. But there was something more, something hidden beneath the surface, something Maria couldn't yet comprehend. As she stood before him, William Jr. revealed an astonishing truth that would forever change the course of her life. Maria was the key to saving his father, and the price she would pay for the cure? More than she could ever imagine. Maria had always prided herself on being a woman of reason. She had learned to keep her emotions in check, to avoid getting caught up in the chaos of the Hawthorne family's opulent world. But when William Jr. spoke those words, "You're the key," everything she thought she knew shattered in an instant. She had never expected to be in this position. In fact, she was sure there had to be some mistake. She was just Maria, the maid, the woman who had cleaned the Hawthorne estate for years without a single thought of ever being more than a background figure in their lives. But William Jr. was looking at her with a piercing intensity, as though he saw something in her that no one else had ever noticed. "I know this is hard to understand," William Jr. said, his voice tinged with a quiet desperation. "But your blood, your genetics are unique. We've run tests. Your DNA contains something rare, something that could save my father. We need it." Maria's stomach churned. Her mind raced. Could this be true? Was she really the answer to the family's prayers, the solution to a billion-dollar empire's most urgent problem? It felt like a twisted joke, a dark turn in a life she thought she understood. And yet the cold reality of William Jr.'s words echoed through her. Her blood could save the man who had never once treated her with kindness. "Why me?" Maria asked, her voice barely above a whisper, her hands trembling at her sides. William Jr. paused, as though struggling with the weight of what he was about to say. "My father's condition is rare, something we've never been able to fully treat. We've tried everything, every possible medical intervention, but nothing has worked. There's a chance, just a small chance, that your genetics could provide the antidote we need. It's a cure that no one else has." Maria could barely process his words. What was he asking of her? What did it mean for her, for her son, for her life? She had seen the power and privilege that the Hawthorne name afforded them. She had cleaned their floors, served them their meals, and watched them live in comfort while she struggled to make ends meet. And now, out of nowhere, she was supposed to save them? To be part of their world in a way she had never been allowed? She was quiet for a long time, absorbing the gravity of the situation. In the distance, she could hear the soft murmur of the wind outside, the rustling of leaves against the window. It felt as if the entire world had fallen silent, as though everything was waiting for her to make a decision. She looked at William Jr., her eyes narrowed in suspicion. "What's the catch?" she asked, her voice steady but filled with an underlying tension. "Why me? Why now?" William Jr.'s face hardened, and he stepped closer, his gaze unwavering. "Because you're the only one who can help us. I know this sounds impossible, but I'm asking you to trust me." Maria shook her head, her mind clouded with confusion. This couldn't be real. She couldn't be the answer. She had no power here. She was just a maid, a woman who had always been invisible in the eyes of the wealthy Hawthorne family. But now, suddenly, her blood was a commodity, a lifeline. Her heart raced. What did this mean for her and her son? Was it worth it? Could she trust William Jr., a man who had always treated her like little more than a servant? And what was the true cost of this antidote? The weight of the decision pressed down on her, suffocating her. She had no idea what to do. All she could hear was the ticking of the clock in the corner, each second dragging her deeper into the unknown. The mystery of it all hung in the air like a thick fog, obscuring her judgment and clouding her future. But Maria knew one thing. Her life would never be the same again, and somehow she would have to find a way to navigate the dark, treacherous waters of this offer before it swallowed her whole. The days that followed Maria's confrontation with William Jr. were nothing short of a whirlwind. She found herself caught in a storm of conflicting emotions, fear, confusion, and a gnawing sense of betrayal. How could she even begin to process what had happened? One moment, she was just a maid in the sprawling Hawthorne estate, and the next, she was thrust into the heart of a family's deepest crisis, an antidote to a dying patriarch's mysterious illness. Maria had always kept a safe distance from the Hawthorne family. They were the epitome of wealth and privilege, while she was an invisible servant, only noticed when something went wrong. But now, she was being asked to become a part of their world, a world she had never been allowed into. William Jr.'s proposal seemed both absurd and impossible. How could a maid like her be the key to saving their billion-dollar empire? It felt like a twisted fairy tale, but with stakes far too high to ignore. She was summoned to the estate every day, each meeting with William Jr., leaving her more entangled in his web. There were no more servants' quarters to return to, no more simple life. Instead, she was escorted into rooms that reeked of power and luxury. He continued to insist that her blood was the only way to cure his father, and Maria began to feel the weight of his words, heavy on her shoulders. But with each passing day, the tension between them grew. Maria could feel it, a magnetic pull between her and the enigmatic William Jr. He was no longer just the cold, ruthless businessman she had seen from afar. In their private moments, he let down his guard. There was something vulnerable behind his hardened exterior, and that made Maria feel even more conflicted. Was this all just a game to him? Was she being manipulated into some cruel scheme? On the other hand, Maria's growing attraction to him made her stomach twist with guilt. She had sworn never to allow herself to be involved with someone from their world. The Hawthornes were not people who cared for others like her. They only saw her as a tool to be used for their benefit. Yet, with every conversation, she found herself questioning the motives behind his actions. Could it be possible that William Jr. wasn't the heartless man she thought he was? One evening, as the mansion's grandeur loomed like a silent witness to their growing bond, Maria's world turned upside down again. William Jr. sat across from her in his study, the same tension hanging between them as always. But this time, there was something different, something darker in the air. "I need you to marry me," he said suddenly, his voice low and unyielding. Maria's heart stopped. The words hung in the air like a threat. She stared at him, her eyes wide in disbelief. "I need your blood for the antidote," William Jr. continued, "and this will make it official. It's the only way to ensure your son's future and mine." Maria's mind reeled. The reality of his offer hit her like a punch to the gut. Marry him? A man she had barely known, a man whose family had treated her like a servant for years? This was no longer just about saving his father. It was about something far more dangerous. It was about power, control, and the possibility that she was nothing more than a pawn in a larger game. Her voice trembled as she tried to find her words. You want me to marry you for a cure? For a bloodline that isn't mine? He nodded, his gaze unwavering. Yes, you don't understand. This is bigger than you and me. This is about survival. Survival for both of us. If you marry me, the family will accept you. Your son will inherit everything. You will no longer be invisible. But Maria was torn. This wasn't just about her or her son anymore. It was about choosing between the life she had fought so hard to build and the unknown future William Jr. was offering her. Could she really trust him? Was this some calculated move, a way for him to gain even more power over a system that was already so stacked in his favor? Or was he telling the truth, desperate for a way to save his father? With her world crumbling around her, Maria knew she had a choice to make. But no matter what she decided, she could already feel the weight of the consequences looming. She was no longer just a maid. She was a woman who had become the center of a high-stakes game that could either make her life or ruin it forever. As the storm raged outside, Maria realized one thing: there was no turning back. And with every passing hour, the tension between her and William Jr. tightened, the stakes higher than ever before. Maria stood in front of the mirror in her modest room, the weight of the silk dress she had been given pressing against her chest. She barely recognized herself in the reflection, her usual maid's uniform replaced by a lavish gown. The woman staring back at her seemed like a stranger, as if she were seeing an alternate version of her life, one she never thought possible. She had made her choice. She had agreed to marry William Jr. The decision felt both like a relief and a burden, a combination of hope and fear that tangled in her chest. The marriage was not for love. Maria knew that much. It was a transaction, an exchange, her blood for the antidote that could save the life of a man who had always treated her like little more than a shadow. The cold, calculated William Hawthorne Jr. had become a man who, despite his ruthless exterior, was now offering her something she had always wanted: a chance at a different life, a life where her son could live free from the constraints of poverty and anonymity. But deep down, Maria could feel the storm inside her, a storm that only grew stronger the more she thought about the deal she had struck. William Jr. hadn't just asked her to marry him for the antidote. He had offered her a chance to be something more than a servant, to be something more than invisible. Her thoughts were interrupted by a soft knock on the door. Without waiting for an answer, William Jr. entered, his presence instantly filling the room. There was something different about him today. He seemed almost vulnerable. The facade of the ruthless businessman he had worn for so long had slipped, and in its place was a man who seemed deeply conflicted. He looked at her with something close to tenderness, though his expression remained guarded. "Maria," he said softly, his voice carrying an emotion that Maria had never heard from him before. "I never thought it would come to this. I didn't want to drag you into this mess, but I had no choice. This is the only way to save my father and ensure the future of the Hawthorne legacy. I need you more than I ever thought I would." Maria stood still, her heart pounding in her chest. She had heard the words, but they meant nothing to her now. What did they mean? What was he asking of her? "I'm doing this for my son," Maria said, her voice steady but cold. "You're right. I need my son to have a future he deserves." She paused, meeting his gaze, unwilling to show any weakness. "But don't expect me to believe you're doing this out of anything other than your own desperation. I know what this is, William. You're saving your father, and you're doing whatever it takes to ensure the Hawthorne name doesn't fall." He flinched at her words, as though they had struck him harder than any blow. For a moment, the tension between them hung thick in the air. Maria could see the battle within him, the conflict between the man he appeared to be and the one he truly was. "I'm sorry, Maria," he said quietly, stepping toward her. "I know I've used you, and I know you don't trust me. But I'm asking for one thing. Trust me now. This is the only way out for both of us." Her eyes narrowed as she studied him. Could she trust him? The question gnawed at her, the answer just out of reach. There was so much at stake, so much that could go wrong. Her son's future, her own life. Could she really believe that this man, the man who had always looked down on her, could change? Could this cold-hearted billionaire truly be the person he was now trying to present himself as? Maria felt a strange mix of emotions: Fear, yes, but also something else, something like hope. Her thoughts were interrupted as William Jr. stepped closer, his hand reaching for hers. At the touch of his fingers, something shifted inside her, a deep connection neither of them had been prepared for. The distance between them seemed to vanish, replaced by something undeniably real. For the first time, Maria saw him not as a man with endless power, but as someone desperate, someone who needed her just as much as she needed him. "I know this isn't easy for you," he said, his voice barely a whisper, "but I swear to you, once my father is well again, things will change. I will make sure you and David are taken care of. I'll make sure you're no longer invisible." For a moment, Maria wanted to believe him, but deep within her, the harsh reality of her situation clung to her like a shadow she couldn't escape. She had agreed to this marriage, not out of love, but out of necessity. But now, standing so close to him, feeling the heat of his body next to hers, Maria couldn't help but wonder if she was getting too close to a man who might be more dangerous than she had first thought. Was he really offering a future of freedom, or was this just another chain, another way to entangle her in a world she was never meant to be a part of? As their hands lingered in the silence, Maria knew that their story had only just begun, and that the choices she made now would define everything that came after. The days leading up to the wedding were a blur of preparations and hidden anxieties. Maria moved through the grand estate like a ghost, caught between the reality of her circumstances and the weight of her decision. Every moment spent in the Hawthorne mansion felt increasingly suffocating, as if the walls themselves were closing in on her. The wedding loomed ahead like a storm on the horizon, one she could no longer escape. Maria had tried to remain emotionally detached. She had told herself that this was not a marriage born of love, but of survival. She had made her decision, and there was no turning back. But as the day approached, doubts crept in, and they didn't come just from her heart. They came from the shadows of the past. She had been summoned to the Hawthorne study once again, where William Jr. awaited her. The room was dimly lit, the only source of light coming from a low-hanging chandelier that cast long shadows across the walls. As soon as she entered, she could feel the tension radiating from him. "Maria, we need to talk," William Jr. said, his voice strained. She stood still at the threshold, her heart pounding. "About what?" He looked up from the papers spread out before him, his eyes filled with an intensity that she couldn't quite place. "It's about the wedding and the future." Maria swallowed hard. The future. That word had taken on a terrifying weight ever since she agreed to this arrangement. What kind of future was she walking into? "I've been thinking," William Jr. continued, his voice softer now, though still laced with urgency, "about what this all means for you and for David." She took a step toward him, her resolve beginning to fracture. "What do you mean?" "The antidote, Maria," he said, standing up, his gaze unwavering. "It's not just about curing my father anymore. It's about the future of the entire Hawthorne legacy. Your blood isn't just a cure. It's the key to something bigger." Maria felt her stomach churn. "What do you mean, something bigger? What are you asking of me, William?" His eyes darkened, his expression hardening. "I'm asking you to marry me because it's the only way to ensure that the Hawthorne name endures. The antidote isn't just about saving my father, it's about ensuring that our family's power remains intact. And you, Maria, have something we can't ignore. Your blood, your genetics, your family line, it's the key to something even greater than we imagined." The words hit her like a punch to the gut. Her family line? She had never considered herself anything more than a servant in their eyes, someone to be used and discarded. But now she was being told that her very existence, her genetics, held the key to preserving their empire. Was that the real reason she was here? Had she been nothing more than a pawn in a much larger game all along? William Jr.'s face softened as he stepped closer to her, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "I never wanted to involve you like this. But I'm asking you, Maria, will you help me? Will you marry me, not just for the antidote, but for the future of our family?" Maria felt the walls close in around her as she struggled to process what he was saying. This wasn't just about love. It wasn't even just about saving a life. This was about control, power, and the future of an empire that had never once considered her as anything other than a tool. She wanted to scream, to push him away, to refuse him outright, but something deeper inside her, a sense of duty, of responsibility to her son, held her in place. For a moment, Maria thought she might walk away, call off the wedding, and end it all before it could go any further. But the reality of her situation was undeniable. She needed this. She needed the future that was being promised to her, and David needed it too. But as William Jr. reached out to touch her hand, the final piece fell into place. She was no longer just a maid. She was a bargaining chip in a game far bigger than her. "Maria," William Jr. said, his voice breaking through her thoughts, "you have to trust me. This is the only way to make it right for both of us." Her mind screamed in protest, but her heart told her to listen to the only man who had ever truly seen her as more than invisible. For a moment she stood frozen, her hand hovering in midair, the future hanging by a thread. But then the truth of her situation hit her like a tidal wave. This wasn't a choice anymore. It was survival. She had already stepped into a life she could not escape, and now there was no turning back. With a deep breath, she nodded. "I'll marry you, William, but don't expect me to forgive you for what you've made me become." His expression softened, and for the first time she saw something like regret in his eyes. But it was too late. The deal was made. And as they stood there, hand in hand, Maria realized that this wedding, this marriage, would be the beginning of something far more dangerous than either of them could imagine. The day of the wedding arrived, draped in an air of opulence that only the Hawthorne name could command. The mansion was buzzing with activity, flashes of white and gold, servants running to and fro, and the murmur of guests as they prepared for the most talked-about event of the year. But amidst the grandeur, Maria felt detached, like she was a spectator at her own life. Everything around her moved in slow motion, and she too was caught in the current of it all, being swept towards something she could neither control nor understand. Maria stood in the bridal suite, the full-length mirror before her reflecting a woman she barely recognized. The once frayed maid now wore a gown of silk and satin that shimmered in the light, a crown of diamonds perched delicately on her head. The transformation was complete, from humble servant to the wife of the heir to one of the richest families in the country. As the final touches were made, Maria looked at herself, feeling a twinge of disbelief. Her hands, once rough and calloused from years of labor, were now adorned with rings and bracelets, symbols of a life she never imagined. Her heart hammered in her chest. How had it come to this? She was marrying a man who had always seen her as nothing more than a tool for his own ends. Yet, here she was, on the verge of making the biggest decision of her life. She had spent so much time convincing herself that this marriage was about survival, about securing a future for David. She had even allowed herself to believe that it was about more than just the antidote, that there was something real between her and William Jr. But today, standing at the precipice of this new life, Maria realized the truth. This wasn't just about her or her son anymore. This was a moment of reckoning. A soft knock on the door broke her thoughts, and before she could answer, William Jr. stepped inside, his tall figure filling the doorway. His face was a mixture of anxiety and resolve, and as he saw her in the gown, his breath caught. For the first time, she saw a flicker of something other than calculation in his eyes, something akin to admiration. "You look," he paused, searching for the right words, "beautiful." Maria's gaze met his, and for a split second, the walls between them seemed to come down. She saw a man, vulnerable and uncertain, standing before her. Not the billionaire heir, but a man caught in a web of expectations and responsibilities. But the moment was fleeting. His hands trembled slightly as he stepped forward, holding out a velvet box. "This is for you," he said, his voice thick with unspoken words. Maria took the box, her fingers brushing his, and opened it to reveal a stunning necklace, the diamonds reflecting the soft light. A symbol of the marriage, of the future they were about to build together. She swallowed hard, fighting the swirl of emotions inside her. She had come to this moment to play her part, to secure the future she had promised her son. Yet here she was, struggling to reconcile the woman she had become with the one she had always dreamed of being. "I don't need this," she whispered, pushing the necklace aside. "I don't need any of this." William Jr.'s brow furrowed. "What do you mean? This is part of our future, Maria. I'm offering you everything." "I didn't ask for your world, William," she replied, her voice steady but firm. "I never wanted your wealth. I wanted a chance for my son to have a life that didn't start with a struggle." The words hung between them, heavy and charged with unspoken truths. William Jr. seemed to recoil as if her words had struck him in a place he didn't want to acknowledge. He was silent for a moment, the weight of his intentions now clearer in the air. "You're right," he said finally, his voice quiet. "You didn't ask for this, and I've done things, said things, because I thought I was doing the right thing, but maybe I've been wrong. Maybe I need you more than just for your blood." Maria took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. Her decision had been made long ago, but now, standing on the edge of this new life, she could see it for what it was, a life she had no control over. But it wasn't too late. She wasn't just a pawn in his game anymore. In this moment, she was the one who held the power. With a sudden clarity, Maria realized that the future she had been given, this life of luxury and privilege, meant nothing if she didn't have control over it. She was no longer willing to let the circumstances of her past define her. She had always been a survivor, and now, more than ever, she had to find a way to survive on her own terms. "I don't need your wealth, William," she said, her voice filled with newfound strength. "I need you to understand that this is not just about your family's legacy, it's about the legacy we build together. If we're going to do this, it's on my terms, too." The room was quiet for a moment as her words sank in. William Jr. looked at her with a mixture of surprise and admiration, as if seeing her for the first time. And in that moment, something shifted. He understood. The marriage, this life, it was no longer about survival. It was about a partnership, a shared future. Maria knew that this was the turning point, the moment when everything changed. She wasn't just a maid anymore. She wasn't just a tool in a man's plan. She was Maria Jenkins, and she was going to fight for her future, for her son's future. And whether William Jr. was ready for it or not, they were going to build it together. The wedding ceremony had come and gone, a blur of white lace and expensive champagne. The mansion, once a symbol of her invisible life, now felt like a gilded cage, its walls pressing in on Maria as she sat by the grand window, staring out at the vast estate that she now called home. The world outside seemed peaceful, but within, the turbulence of her emotions churned, unable to settle. Maria had married William Jr. with a purpose, to secure a future for David, to ensure that her son would never have to endure the hardships she had faced. She had never expected love or happiness to come from this union. It was a contract, a means to an end. Yet, as the days wore on, something in her began to shift. The initial resentment, the tension between them, started to give way to a fragile understanding. William Jr. wasn't the man she had once believed him to be. He had changed, though she could sense it wasn't easy for him. He was learning to let go of his inherited entitlement, his cold, calculating ways, in order to truly listen to her, to be part of a partnership that went beyond bloodlines and fortune. One evening, after a long day of meetings, William Jr. entered the room where Maria sat, looking at the family portraits hanging on the walls. He closed the door quietly behind him, taking a moment to gather his thoughts. Maria didn't turn to face him immediately. She was lost in her own thoughts, reflecting on how far they had come and how far they still had to go. "I've been thinking," William Jr. said softly, breaking the silence, "about everything, about us." Maria finally turned to him, her eyes meeting his with a mixture of wariness and something deeper, curiosity. "What about us?" she asked, her voice steady but laced with caution. The emotional distance between them had been slowly closing, but it was still there. She wasn't sure if it would ever fully dissolve, not after everything they had been through. He stepped closer, his expression sincere, yet vulnerable in a way she had never seen before. "I know I haven't made it easy for you. I've tried to control everything, my family, my business, even you. But I see now that I've been wrong. I've been so focused on saving everything that I didn't realize what I was losing in the process." Maria listened intently, her heart thumping in her chest. Was he really changing? Or was this just another part of the game he had been playing all along? I don't know how to make this right, William Jr. continued, his voice low and filled with regret. But I want to try. I want to make this marriage real, Maria, not just for the sake of the family, but because I've come to realize that I need you, not just for your blood, but for who you are. The words hung in the air, and for a long moment Maria remained silent, her gaze fixed on him. There was a part of her that wanted to shut him out, to remind him of all the ways he had wronged her, but there was another part of her, the part that had fought so hard for her son, for herself, that wanted to believe in this new version of William Jr. The man who stood before her now wasn't the same as the one who had manipulated her into this marriage. This man was trying to be better, to be more than the sum of his wealth and privilege. And in that moment, Maria realized that maybe, just maybe, there was room for change. There was room for them to rebuild something different, something real. I'm not asking for your forgiveness, William Jr. said, his eyes pleading now. I just want a chance to prove that I can be more than the man I've been, for you, for David, for us. Maria stood up, the weight of the moment settling over her like a heavy cloak. She had spent so much time guarding herself against the world, against men like him, but now, in the stillness of this room, she saw something she hadn't seen before. A chance to build something with him, something they could both take ownership of. I don't know if I can forgive you, Maria said, her voice barely above a whisper, but I'm willing to try, for David and for us. The silence between them was thick, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was a silence filled with possibilities, possibilities that neither of them had ever imagined before. And in that silence, William Jr. took her hand, his touch tentative at first, but then growing stronger as he pulled her closer. Maria didn't know what the future held. She didn't know if this marriage, this partnership would last, but she knew one thing. It was no longer about survival. It was about building a life that was hers and hers alone. Together, they had the power to change the course of their destiny. And for the first time in a long time, Maria allowed herself to believe in that possibility. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm glow over the estate, Maria and William Jr. stood together, facing the future. And though it was uncertain, they faced it side by side, no longer as master and servant, but as equals, two people willing to fight for their own chance at a life they could share.